What's the funniest thing you've seen someone do that you weren't allowed to laugh at? A friend of mine who was always late to work died after an epileptic fit. The undertakers and vicar got delayed and he was late to his own funeral, and it was the most fitting and hilarious moment and he'd have loved it. But obviously you can't burst out laughing when the staff at a funeral tell you that he's not there yet. Edit. Also, he only worked some days, so we called him part-time Pete, and in the long run he really was only here part-time. He always did like knocking off early. The CD started skipping at my stepmom's funeral. Everyone thought it was a sign from her, but it turned out it was just a shitty CD. A guy was acting as his own attorney. He was questioning himself in court by standing up, asking a question, then sitting down to answer it. The judge finally looked at him and said, "Sit down, Mr. X." I almost lost it, but managed to hold my court demeanor. So one time, me and my class were watching a play where all the actors were both blind and deaf. At one point, they were walking on the stage with no one to guide them, and one of them fell off the stage. Paramedic here watched a drunk falling down a bunch of stairs. He had several broken bones and looked like a brestle. He then just screamed at his friend to get him a new beer because he dropped his. Nearly pissed myself. "Sir, can you move your arm? Why are you sticking it out like that? I'm waiting for a drink to appear in my hand. Fuckhead." My stepdad was an Italian from Manhattan. He had the classic Italian mobster accent. We all live in Minnesota, born and raised, so his accent was definitely different from what we're used to. My brother loved to playfully make fun of him by imitating him by saying classic Italian mobster exclamations along with the hand mannerisms. Stepdad was a laid-back guy and found it funny, and the banter between those two was very light-hearted. So, one day, we were having a small get-together at our house with my mom, stepdad, my brother and a few friends. We were all hanging out outside when my 4-year-old daughter excited started saying, "Uncle Paulie, Uncle Paulie, watch this." As everyone watched, she went over to a piece of dog poop, pointed at it by shaking her open palmed hands, and exclaimed in the most perfect Italian mobster accent, "What the F is the ice?" She even did the head bob perfectly. We all stifled laughter. Just 2 nights ago my picky daughter was telling us that she didn't like meatloaf. No way, no how. Then she described a Japanese hamburger steak that she wanted to make. Hamburger, breadcrumbs, egg, ketchup, soy sauce, etc. When she was done, I said that she described the exact thing sitting on her plate, and she got really mad. Laughing only made her madder. Couldn't stop laughing though. My mother-in-law was basically awful to me early in our relationship. Called me names, made comments about my family, made comments about my upbringing in a trailer home. Really cool. I remember always trying to be the better person. Anyway, there was a big gathering of my wife's family. My mill was holding court and made a few shots at me at the dinner. She left to get something out of the kitchen at some point. On her return, someone had closed the screen door, and she walked right into it, mid-stride, mid-sentence. She made a hilarious noise. I almost guffawed, but my wife clenched my knee. I laughed on the inside and pictured it whenever I needed a pick-me-up from her narcissistic victimhood. We are estranged from her now. Big shock. I've watched some children run into glass doors, but I couldn't laugh. I had to be nice. One night when I was in college I was really drunk and very hungry, but the problem was every place that delivered food was closed because it was like 4 AM. Then I remembered that there was a McDonald's like 2 to 3 miles from campus that I could walk to. I checked the website and it said it was open 24 hours. So I started to make my way. As I got close to the student center on the edge of campus, I started second guessing whether or not that McDonald's was open 24/7 or not. So I decided to pop into the computer lab in the basement, which was always open, to go online and check again. This was before smartphones were big, so this would be my last chance to check before making the bigger chunk of my drunken journey. The lights were off in the lab, so I thought I would be the only person there. But when I entered the room and the lights came on, I saw a security guard sitting at one of the computers. He's startled by me and scrambles to close the window he was looking, which I could already tell was Pornhub. I didn't know how to react, so I just sat down at a computer and didn't say a word. He breaks the awkward silence by getting up, stretching his arms into the air, and saying, "Well, it's about that time," and then makes his way to the door. It took all of my will to not break into laughter at the ridiculousness of this whole situation. But I did not want him to get mad and write me up for being drunk on the academic side of campus. So I just nodded and said, "Yup." However, I did laugh all the way to the McDonald's, which ended up being 24 hours, but only for drive-through, and they wouldn't serve me, so I had to hoof it back home. Great uncle's funeral. The vicar was doing his thing, but when he said arsehole in his posh-ish accent, it sounds just like arsehole, and it got me. I managed to keep it together the first time, but after the second one I could barely hold it back. It was something like, "Arsehole is something we should cherish. It defines who we are." I was stifling laughter to the point of tears. My mum said, after she thought I was crying, "There's an Oasis song called Acquiesce where the same things happens. https://www.youtube.com/watch v equals n7xd high 8hk9y and t equals 1m25s." And me and my cousin, who was sitting away from me inside the church, used to make each other laugh by singing that. We were about 13 or 14 at the time. After the service had finished, we met outside and were rolling about in fits of laughter. He had had the exact same reaction. It's something we still laugh about 20 years later. At my friend's grandfather's funeral, the first sentence of the pastor's speech was, "We are all here because we love D so much." His name was Richard. This holy man gave a 15-minute speech about his love of D and how D changed his life. My wife and I did not make eye contact through the entire thing for fear of busting out laughing in a quiet, crowded church. It took me about a year to ask my friend his thoughts about it, and apparently he was close to losing it too. I went to a Holy Rollers church with my friend in middle school. I had no idea her church would be like this. She had an emotional breakdown at the end of mass and we went to the bathrooms so she could cry. Then we started walking back into the worship center where her mom, big woman, was, and some other people were still praying. I hear someone shouting, which wasn't hard to find at this church. As we get closer to the front and it's her mom, speaking in tongues. It sounded like a Harry Potter spell chanted over and over again. Her hands were flailing in there and she eventually fell over to her right side and crushed a skinny guy next to her. I had to stifle my laughter so bad I almost peed. Later I told my friend that I was sorry her mom fell over in church and she said she didn't fall. She was pushed. I was confused. BC I know I saw her fall. She looked me dead in the face and said she was pushed by the Holy Spirit. I threw my head back laughing and me and her weren't very good friends after that. Helping a grade 2 class, 8-year-olds, and one of the kids was just so loud. He was running around the class when one of the girls held out her arm and clotheslined him. I was able to keep a straight face for that, but she kneeled down and yelled, "Boom," at him. He started crying. They both got a detention, and I almost bit through my tongue. My first time in Houston, a very large lady was going up a full escalator. Near the top, she suddenly fell into a low sitting position, as if her legs gave in. She didn't fall down the steps or anything. She was just stationary, no longer moving up with the escalator. Her size prevented anyone from passing around her, so everyone behind her began to walk backwards to not crash into her, some picking up their luggage. When I was kid, there was this really old man who came to church religiously. He could barely even move without assistance and needed a walker for balance. So one Sunday morning, he decides he needs to use the restroom, which is adjacent to the main room where all of us are sitting and taking communion. You know, the wine and bread part. Suddenly, while one of the men is praying, we hear a loud thump come from the bathroom, followed immediately by a long, drawn-out groan. I still feel bad about it, but that groan, especially as a kid hearing it during communion of all times, was one of the funniest things I ever heard in church. Well, immediately some men got up, rushed over, and got the door unlocked. Turns out the old man fell and broke his hip, and that was the last we ever saw of him at church. Rest in peace, old man. In boot camp, the drill instructors are constantly trying to get you to break your bearing, get you to show emotion, or like you're being affected by what's going on around you. Turns out one of the best ways to do this is to be violently funny people who constantly pepper the most creative insults into their tirades. And occasionally they venture into pure lunacy. So during range week, when we were in the pits pulling targets, one of the recruits was effing around, not taking things very seriously. So our heavy informed him that if he wasn't going to be serious, he was going to skip up and down the line of targets, shouting a very specific phrase: "Fire the candy cannons. Coat the town with marshmallows." Said recruit was, predictably, not very enthusiastic about being forced to do this, and he half-heartedly mumbled while he was moving down the line. Our heavy was displeased with his performance and exhorted him to improve thusly. No, with feeling. Like this. Fire the candy cannons. Coat the town with marshmallows. With such a savage mocking of the fake British accent, a lot of theatre kids pick up that it almost had to be informed by personal experience. Ridiculous then. Ridiculous now. Probably ridiculous on my death. I had a high school teacher who was a very moody and sarcastic person. One day, he took a full-size poster board, took a black Sharpie, and wrote "ticking time bomb", then hung it around his neck. He wore it all day. No one was supposed to laugh cause that could set off the bomb. Also, in his class one day, he asked a question in class. One of the big jocks hurriedly answered by saying, "Well, I read that blah blah." This teacher looked at him and said, "You read?" In middle school, a girl with a lisp opened her speech in history class with, "In 1776, and I couldn't help myself." I was once at a food and drink event that was put on by a very famous and eccentric German chef. When it was over, he invited my friend and I back to his farm for an after party. His farm famously hosts chefs from all over the world who live with him and learn from him. So as a young chef, this was a huge honor. My friend and I had quite a few cocktails, and when it was time for the famous chef to give us directions, he started drawing a map with all kinds of windy dirt roads. He kept saying, "And this road is windy, 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 windy" in his thick German accent, while scribbling all over the page. And it just kept going, to the point that my friend and I were visibly holding back tears of laughter. We ended up having an amazing time at the farm, but I'm 100% positive the chef did not like us at all after we laughed in his face while he tried to give us directions. I was at a family reunion when my toddler cousin face planted on a coffee table. He was fine, but it was very loud and it caused the adults to flock to him and console him. Meanwhile, 13-year-old me is laughing his ear off and can't stop. I got a lot of dirty looks which only made me laugh more. I blame AFV for conditioning me to delight at misfortune. Back when I was about 19 years old, I met up with a young woman at a coffee shop near the beach. Mere seconds after we had collected our drinks and sat down to talk, a loud series of sounds, a screech, a pop, and a crunch, became audible from outside. It turned out that someone had lost control of their car, plowing it into a nearby tree. A dozen or so people crowded around the window to gawk, and there was a collective gasp as the driver emerged from her vehicle, revealing that her head was bleeding. One of the cafe's employees went to call the paramedics, and my date asked if we should try to help the woman. I was about to respond with my agreement, but the words never came out, largely because they were stifled by barely contained laughter. I'm not a monster, I swear. See, at the exact moment that I'd been about to speak, an enormous, almost spherical man on a motorized bicycle had come riding into view. He looked to be about 50, had an expression of intense concentration on his face, and was moving so slowly that it really seemed like he should have toppled over. Each of the man's limbs were frozen in place, statue-like, as the dull whine of the vehicle's tiny motor struggled to inch him forward. I don't know why I found that so hilarious, but I couldn't contain my amusement. Worse still, the look of horror on my date's face somehow only made the whole situation funnier. The man on the moped crept by as if in slow motion, looking for all the world like only a powerful psychic effort was keeping him from capsizing. And all the while, I kept right on laughing. We didn't have a second date. TL. Doctor, laughter and a literal collision combined to create a figurative wreck. My 75-ish-year-old grandma was getting married for the 4th time, and at her wedding my cousin was going to sing a song. Well, my dad told me, and the friend I brought with me to under no circumstance laugh. My cousin was not known for her singing capabilities, so she starts this god-awful rendition of Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You. So my friend and I are really trying to keep it together, and one of my uncles turns around, and he is beet red from trying not to laugh. My friend and I could barely contain ourselves, but we managed. It's horrible, I know, but my god, we look back and laugh about that. This was in the mid-90s. My cousin is a wonderful person, but singing is definitely not her strong suit. Every time I see someone trip or fall, I simply can't hold it back. Sometimes I really lose my ass, like the guy shoveling snow or the teenager trying to kick a stump, missing and falling. They always get me. Sometimes I can hold it in long enough to check whether the person is okay or not. Other times, they're going to have to live with me laughing while I help them up. Had a friend that was very much on the big side. He was sitting on a foldable party chair while watching TV. All of a sudden he broke it while sitting on it and just fell flat on his back hard. It made a loud noise and felt the floor move a bit. Everyone just bursted out laughing at him. But I thought it was messed up seeing him getting up looking embarrassed edition. Another time we were playing catch at school a football. One friend went for a long par. Then while looking up for the ball, he just fell on his and rolled in pain. We were all trying not to laugh, but some did. Turns out there was a hole in the ground and he stepped in it and cracked his foot. We ended up putting him in a shopping cart and took him to his house down the street. Next time I saw him, he had a big cast on his foot/leg. Watched a kid knock himself out with a rifle butt. Background: high school JROTC. One of the drill team cadets was trying to learn a spin trick with an M1 Garand. He got it once, shouted, "Hey, watch this," and spun it again. Clocked himself in the temple, and it was lights out. I couldn't laugh because I was the most senior cadet on deck and had to take care of his sorry ass. My grandfather died, and my family gathered up at my grandmother's house to reminisce about him. The TV was on in the background, and of course there was a comedy sketch going that was about juices for your deceased grandfather, where they strapped the grandfather to a wheelchair and made him do Nitro Circus tear stunts. It was like something straight out of /r/shock, but I don't know what it was, but I just found that sketch so bizarre and hilarious, even though I was devastated about the loss of my own grandfather, and I still feel kind of guilty for wanting to laugh at it. I was watching Hunger Games in theaters and the rude death scene caused a reaction from the person behind me that left me laughing so hard I thought the people who didn't hear her would think I was a horrible person. Right when the spear hits her, I heard the "so damn" from behind me, like the most stereotypical dumb reaction gif sound effect of a dude getting kicked in the nads. It clashed with the scene so much, and was the only time the person ever spoke. It just cracked me up. In-app biology teacher was giving a lesson with the door open. With how our classrooms were situated at the time, the special ed room was right across the hall. One of the kids began to throw a tantrum and was screaming/moaning full volume. Well, I guess the screaming sounded awfully like a race cab, so a kid in our class began miming out shifting gears in the back of the class with really exaggerated movements. Keep in mind, our teacher never once stopped to close the door and just kept teaching as if nothing's happening. And I'm off in the corner effing dying because some kid is just Tokyo drifting in the back as well, with some autistic kid as the soundtrack. It was just so bizarre in what was normally a pretty boring setting. Absolutely hilarious. We were 16 and a friend's birthday party. 4 in the morning, the 8 of us decide to go to the nearby elementary school to run around the roof. 2 of the boys tipped over a porta potty. On the walk home, the cops roll up and make us return to the school to make sure we didn't do any more damage. As we were walking into the front gate, one of the officers had climbed over a fence to look around. As he was climbing back over, his nightstick got caught in the fence and he fell on his next to all of us. I'm surprised no one bit through their lip trying not to laugh. As an added bonus, my friend's mom was so pissed at us when she picked us up from the school that she wasn't paying attention and backed up into one of the cop cars. Over white lad riding his bike on the pavement on the opposite side of the road. He was getting slower and slower, and just as he was getting parallel with us, all forward momentum ran out, and he stopped and fell onto his side, still pretty much holding the handlebars. We lost our S and started laughing, and he stood up, shrugged and went "I just don't know," and sat on the curb. It was a long road, and as we were nearing the end, we looked back, and he was still sat there. Bless him. Even he couldn't deny how hilarious it was. It was a small art gallery opening. The lady who owned it was a friend of my mother's, so we were invited, my mother, me, 16-yo, and my brother, to come to the very fancy high culture festivities. She had arranged some light entertainment in the form of her interpretive dancer. This podgy middle-aged lady in flowy fabrics with a scarf was flying around the small lawn, waving her scarf and arms about randomly and occasionally rolling about on the ground. I think it was accompanied by in-ear music. I could barely breathe and had to bite my tongue super hard and absolutely make sure I did not look at my mother or brother or we would have all died of laughter.